So, we have on our channel lots of people, obviously, that followed originally because of the Chris Watts case. Now we have, other cases that just keep popping up, in Houston and Idaho, where these women are accused of killing their children. And so I mean, in Pennsylvania, there's a horrific case where the woman is accused of hanging her children with from dog collars from the rafters in the basement.
Ugh.
And so I guess my question is you as a trained professional,
Hmm.
how can somebody do that? It just seems to go against everything in nature of a mother to protect their young, so to speak.
Yeah,
Give me some insight on that.
yeah, we need a lot of time for it because it's actually really complex. I've done a bunch of research on it, and actually, there's not a lot of studies out there. You would think that there would be. The studies that are out there, we're focused on trying to identify people who are at risk for killing their children in hopes of preventing it. And so I think that's why we talk about the psychology and trying to understand this a lot as well. How do we identify at-risk people to prevent it? And it is really complicated. Although it's not as uncommon as people would think. Children in their first, 4 to 5 years of life are most likely to be killed by a parent than a stranger, which I just think is unbelievable. So you have that. If we're talking about parents killing their children, there's several categories. There's something called neonaticide, which is the killing of a child within the first 24 hours of life. And almost 100% of the time, that happens to a young mother or a poor mother. You hear those stories. They give birth in the high school prom in the bathroom, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So you have a lot more insight into that type of child murder. But then when we have something like infanticide, which the definition is the killing of a child within the first year of life. And then we have maternal filicide and paternal filicide. So it's either the killing of the child by a mother or the killing of the child by a father. And I can go into, some of the main motives, but they're a little bit different than mothers and fathers. So where would you like me to go first?
Well, why don't we start off first? I mean, I think it's an interesting statistic, but not something that necessarily, I don't think it surprises me that if you're going to be killed as a child, that's going to be usually by a parent, at least in the age, between ages of birth and 4 to 5 years old. I mean, are most of these cases, trying to identify people, is it the mom that has, postpartum depression and, they just wind up killing their children? The teenager that panics because she can't tell anybody that she's pregnant. I mean, why don't you just kind of start from there, and then we'll talk about,
Right.
mom, dad's perspective,
Yeah.
I guess.
So I'm going to give credit to Dr. Philip Resnick, and he's the guy who did a lot of research on the motives of maternal filicide, and he illustrated 5 main motives. So you named one of them, which is one of the more common ones, which is, postpartum depression, or what they call acute psychosis. So acute psychosis is that there's no, you can't comprehend, there's no comprehensible, rationale as to why they would do it, but maybe they heard hallucinations. I think of Andrea Yates, which is one of the most famous cases of postpartum psychosis. So that is one of the more common ones. However, I think the most common motive, which I found surprising, was fatal maltreatment, it's called. And fatal maltreatment is when it's not an intent to kill the child, but the child dies as a result of repeated abuse, or, someone's hurting their child and they go too far, or Munchausen's by proxy is included in that. So for people who don't know what Munchausen's by proxy is, it's when a parent, usually a mother, makes the child sick in hopes of getting positive attention, or, a lot of attention just for themselves. And
kind of as the caregiver. Look, I'm such a great caregiver for my sick child.
Yeah. And sometimes with Munchausen's, the parent does, there's a lot of true crime stories about that. The parent does intend to kill the child for sympathy for themselves. But a lot of the times, that it's actually sometimes by accident. And so that's one of the more common motives behind that. We also have Altruistic Killings, where, that sort of goes along with Andrea Yates as well with her psychosis. She thought that she was doing her children a favor or saving them from harm. So when mothers kill their children for what they believe is altruistic reasons, they feel that they're doing it in the best interest of the child.
Well, is that somebody that's not necessarily, suffering from a mental disease, or are they just trying to rationalize what they've done?
Personally, I think a lot of the time altruistic killings are kind of comorbid with mental illness, but in Dr. Resnick's work, he separates them. So I don't think you have to necessarily be psychotic or mentally ill to do some sort of altruistic killing. But there's not enough research on there about that. But that's an interesting question. I'd like to see more research about that.
Okay.
The other one, which, I think makes sense to a lot of people who watch your channel and some of the cases you've been talking about, is the unwanted child. And so that's when the child poses a burden to the parent and they don't want, they don't want the burden of that child anymore. So they kill them. And so those are, some of the main reasons, main motivations that there's research behind.
How about, and it's been kind of a crazy morning, but the cases where somebody goes and kidnaps somebody else's child. Have you done any research on that? I mean, we had a case here in Boulder where a lady goes over, finds a woman who's pregnant, gonna buy baby clothes, literally performs a C-section on her, takes her out. We have a case in Houston where the mother goes missing, and then her best friend, where everyone thought she was pregnant, turns out she has the child. I mean, it's kind of a flip side of it where somebody kills somebody else, but where somebody wants another child. I mean, is that kind of related, or someone wants a child so desperately they're going to kill for it versus somebody that doesn't want a child? I mean,
yeah, that could be part of it. Again, there's so many different factors that go into each case. There's mood disorders versus personality disorders. So personality disorders are, more what we talk about with the narcissism and the psychopathy and the antisocial and the histrionic. And that's separate than the mood disorders, which could include psychosis, like bipolar with psychotic episodes, depression with psychotic episodes, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, all of those things. So you could have a personality disorder and a mood disorder. There's a lot of research on a lot of people who do this stuff have a history of domestic violence in their own life, or sexual abuse or physical abuse. And so there's all kinds of things that, again, I like to use the perfect storm that sort of culminate in very different and individual motives, but they can all sort of fall into one of the 5 categories that Dr. Resnick described.
Okay. Well, and I'm sorry, I got kind of sidetracked on you there. Yeah. When you talk about the infanticide, I mean, just kind of continue how that all plays out. I mean, what does the research say? Can we predict this?
Well, the research, I have some numbers. Took some notes. It says 200 women kill their children a year. 3 to 5 children a day are killed by their parent. And homicide is one of the leading causes of death with children under age 4. So again, this is, and a lot of the time it is by a parent. And so, this is, and also what I found interesting, the U.S. is the highest rate of child homicide by a parent. It's a global problem, but it's highest here in the U.S., but it is a global problem. And so one of the things, when we look at how can we spot someone who may be at risk, I think definitely in the first year of life with infanticide, postpartum depression sets in usually within the first year after a child is born. And so we really want to try to look at how do we identify a person who's at risk for postpartum depression. I know, I've had so many friends that have had it, and it's a very shameful thing because a lot of the time they may have thoughts about harming their child, and it may not be something that they would ever do, but they're so ashamed of that they won't reach out for help and tell somebody about it. And that's where we sort of need to erase the stigma about that, because that's where I really worry, is that one day somebody has those thoughts, but they're too afraid to reach out for help because there's so much shame around that.